Hello everybody, this is Steve Leibson. I'm here talking today with Tom Osborne. Tom is the person who almost single-handedly got HP into the calculator business, and we're going to talk to him today about his experiences with digital design, calculators, and HP. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here, and thanks for driving up the crooked road to visit me.
Let's start by talking about how you got into engineering and electronics in the first place, because I think that's quite an adventure.
Yeah, it was kind of strange because Norman Johnson, who also worked at HP later on, and I were probably the terrorists of the juvenile Cody, Wyoming area, and we were messing around with all kinds of crazy things, including pyrotechnics, and why we didn't end up in jail is beyond me, but we didn't. But we did end up taking pinball machines apart and making other things out of them, and got interested in ham radio, and ended up visiting the local radio station and the chief engineer, Phil Barnhart. And we asked so many questions that Phil said, "You're wasting my time, why don't I teach you electronics?" So he did, and that was really where it started.
How old were you that time?
We were probably, I'd say 14, 15, and it was really enlightening to have that, the power to be able to make things do what you wanted to do. And it was a lot of fun because we experimented with a large number of things, and we're kind of pioneers in single sideband, and I still have my ham radio ticket, so it's a fun hobby.
So from there, you ended up going into the military for a while, and that also propelled you into engineering.
Yeah, I went to the University of Wyoming and majored in electrical engineering, and then went into the military, and I was going to be a jet jockey, but for some reasons that are far beyond what you want to hear here, I had already wanted to become an engineer, and I had a 3-year commitment to the Air Force, but if I was going to fly, I had to do 5, so I decided to become a meteorologist, which was a 3-year profession. And I went to University of Washington, and where they had an IBM 650. So I learned I took that programming class on the 650, which was IBM's first computer, and I had a blast. And I haven't told Steve this, but the class project that I wrote was, could you win at blackjack if you could memorize the cards? And the answer was yes. I didn't do it because it required memorization capabilities that I didn't have, but it was interesting to find out that other people did some decade later, and so blackjack is no longer played with one deck of cards and down to the end. But I watched the IBM 650 think its way through programs. It was a fascinating thing to watch because it was so slow that you could actually see the lights executing the programs. And there I wondered, how in the heck do they design those things? So I finished out my meteorological career, went to Berkeley to find out why, and was very disappointed in the way that I found out that these things were working. So that caused me to do some other things, which I've told Steve about, and he can cue me on to where he wants to go to the next stop.
Okay. So now you're at Berkeley, and Berkeley is important because it's where you develop the ASM methodology. And perhaps you could spend some time talking about how you developed that, and I think we want to talk about the readings in Boole that led you to that, and then work our way up to graduating from Berkeley.
Yeah, it was an interesting time at Berkeley. I knew that it represented the state of the art at that time, and it just wasn't the way that I thought that it was going to be at all as far as digital design. And while programming both in the Air Force on an IBM 704 and prior to that on the LGP 50 or LGP 30 at Berkeley, where I had to write a program that translated or emulated the IBM 704, I used a lot of flowcharts. And someplace along the line, I said, you know, I think that if I wrote the right kind of flowchart, I could convert that directly into digital circuitry. And that started an unnamed thing in my mind, but was later called the algorithmic state machine, and it worked. So I never had circuit diagrams. It converted thoughts directly into wiring diagrams. And if I could jump ahead, when we did some work at Hewlett-Packard, in Loveland, a fellow by the name of Lou Dose, a marvelous person, just couldn't believe that all this stuff worked that way. And he made a circuit diagram for the 9100. And it was the first time I ever saw a logic diagram, and it wrapped totally around a room. I mean, it was the most awesome piece of work I'd ever seen. And Lou said, "Now I understand it, and it does work." And I just couldn't believe that it could even be done. So compliments to Lou Dose for showing me that what I had avoided. But I did use the algorithmic state machine for a while I was working for a company in Oakland named Smith Corona Marchant, which was manufacturing mechanical rotary calculators. They and a couple of other companies, Frieden and Monroe, had the entire world's market for complex calculating devices. And there I met Ken Peterson, who has been a long-time friend. And Ken and I did some ASM stuff, and Ken put them together, and we checked it out. So the two of us were out designing stuff that nobody else understood. And there's a long story about how that all ended, and I'm sure you probably don't want to know it, but I'll kick it back to Steve and see what he thinks, because I've talked to him about this stuff, so he's a good online editor.
I think let's leave that for momentary,
okay,
and jump to, you're at SCM now, and SCM asked you to go down with Booz Allen to Southern California to check something out.
They did. I do want to go back and talk about two books that I read that greatly influenced me at Berkeley. One of them was, I did read Boole himself, and I suggest to anybody that's in the logic design field to read what Boole had to say. It's absolutely fascinating, and for what it's worth, we have only touched what I think Boole had to say. We used the and or, plus and dot operators, and all of our logic is designed from that. Boole also incorporated the minus and the divide to great use, and I used some of his techniques in deriving a lot of stuff, mainly different kinds of flip-flops, and whenever I could, why I do it. It's great for optimization. And also I used a book by Montgomery Pfister that was called The Logical Design of Digital Circuitry. And of all the books that I read in that era, he was the one who really nailed it. And that's still a good read. So anyway, now on to where
we're going to Southern California.
Okay, I was at SCM, Smith Corona Marchant.
And how long had you been there?
I had been there less than a year. And they were working on evaluating a machine done by a fellow by the name of Stanley Frankel, who is an amazing physicist, and I'm learning more about him all the time because Steve has done some research on him. But Stanley was a kind, gentle, very intelligent guy who had put together a machine that I am astonished that he could have thought it through, because it was elegantly done, and it had some problems because, not of his fault, but he was using delay lines for memory, and those things were fierce because the doggone things were terribly, terribly, terribly sensitive to temperature, and if you had more than one of them, the bits that would come out would be out of sync at the ends, and it would be a bearcat to design. Anyway, he was doing it, and he was using some 5-cent diodes, which at that time was about 10% of what a diode was costing if you had one that was real. And I have since found out that Stanley had an in on the reject diodes from, who was it, Sylvania? Hughes. So I made a recommendation that I didn't think that it would be a profitable item. And I was tortuously reprimanded by some professional consultants, and fortunately it didn't permanently dent me, but I've never been ripped worse than that before or afterwards. And I since that time, very, very closely after the event, found out that some consultants are paid to tell the people who hire them the answers they want to hear, and SCM wanted to hear that they should be making that. So anyway, it was, I said I wouldn't work on it. I didn't want to lead somebody into failure. Which,
and you also, I think, offered to design a better one.
yeah, I did. I said, I can make one, and a machine for you. And they said, no, we have the one we want, and so on. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, if you'll give me lab space, I'll make it, and all you have to do is pay me for if you buy it, well, when you're all through, you can pay me for the time I spend. It's a zero-cost thing to you. And they summarily rejected it. So I was out of a job, and I didn't know what to do. And they were really leaning on my case legally, because they said, you didn't give us all the documents when you left, which was a prerequisite to being hired. And I said, I have. And they said, well, you said you could make a calculator. We want to see the design for that calculator. And I said, there isn't one. I just know I can do it. And that turned out to be quite a hassle. I decided to make the calculator at home. Fortunately, my wife at that time, Carol, had a job, and she financed it, and I thank you, Carol. It worked out well for both of us. But I was worried about being hit by SCM later, so I had a couple of contacts and ended up at one of the best law firms in San Francisco and spent what I thought was a fortune, but it wasn't very much. But to me it was at that time. And the man named Jack Ward wrote a one-paragraph letter to SCM that essentially said, I have given you all of the things you requested. You asked me for things that I do not have. If there are any other questions, I'd be glad to answer them. And they didn't answer, so I was legally free to go out and design whatever it was going to be. So I was living at Berkeley in a very small apartment, and started out, and I'm sitting in the chair right now that I used for part of the design.
And it's green.
It's green, yeah. Maybe that's why. Green's not my favorite color, by the way. It's a lucky color for me. And started off on the design of what turned out to be the green machine, which was only green because I went down to an auto paint store and they had Cadillac green. That looked like the color for me.
So let's talk about the green machine. It was a calculator.
It was. It was a... actually, even at that time, it had a lot of features. The state of the art at that time were machines that had maybe 2-decade or a 20-digit range, and they could do arithmetic between those things. And if it was a bigger number, it overflowed, and if it was a smaller number, you got all zeros. And I wanted to go, as in the IBM 704, to a full floating point architecture, which means I had 200-decade range of 10 significant digits over the 200 decades. So I carried an exponent and a mantissa. And the state of the art at that time was delay line memories, and I wanted to go to a core memory, which was being used in the very large computers. So...
there's a big cost difference there.
Oh yeah, there's a big cost difference. But I thought I could do it, and learned a lot about magnetics along the way, and was able to get a small core memory in that worked well. And then I hooked all of and drove a CRT that in one showing that I gave to Aerojet, I offered to take this whole crew out to lunch, and they said, you can't afford it. And they said, and besides, if you could, why don't you take the money and make a bigger display? Because of a 3-inch tube on the thing, which is about what I could afford. And let me me see where am I in this stage.
So we were using core memory.
Oh yeah, where you got the old core memory going. And so I built a rather elegant tester so I could single step through the whole process. And by the way, I didn't have any instrumentation at all when I designed this thing. I mean, I think looking back, I was a pretty good circuit designer. But I didn't have any, I made a blocking oscillator clock circuit, and to tune it up, I knew what frequency it should be, but I wasn't going to nail it by a long shot. With there are too many variables, but I could tune it, and so I went out and used my ham radio and turned on to like 720 kilohertz and adjusted one length and up to 1440 or whatever it was, and adjusted the other length of the clock pulse, and it worked. So then I went on to the sense amplifiers for the core memory, and the darn thing worked, but it worked in the wrong way. I was getting zeros when I wanted ones and ones when I wanted zeros. I spent a couple days trying to find out why that was, and and finally decided I needed an oscilloscope. And I had a friend who getting a PhD at Berkeley, Richard Lacoste, and he let me in the lab one night, and I found the problem. And it was a fortunate mistake, because for those who are watching this that are technically oriented, I was driving a transistor out of saturation instead of just having a typical sense amplifier that was active. And the couple of millivolts sensitivity of driving a transistor out of saturation was incredible. It had noise immunity, great idea. And I used that, and that was the last time I saw it. That was the only circuit I saw of the thing until I finally got to Hewlett-Packard and was able to see how the rest of this stuff was working.
So we're up to about, the machine is now working, we're up to about 1965?
Yeah.
And so now you have to find somebody to market it to, and that wasn't easy, was it?
No, I have a pile of rejects you can't believe. And I learned a lot, mainly by submitting them I submitted my applications to the engineering department. And in retrospect, most of the people that I was submitting it to were charged with doing what I had done. And they didn't want to hear about me. So I started writing to the presidents of the corporation, which had a much better effect. One of the places I ended up with was at Frieden, and they were incredibly interested. And I would not open the case on that machine to save, there was no way. And they also wanted me to sign non-disclosure agreements and all kinds of things, and I wouldn't do any of that. After 6 weeks, I finally, Frieden kind of saying, well, we'd like to know more, and yeah, we're interested in all that. I said, this isn't going very well. And I talked to Bob Reagan, who was our chief engineer, and I said, Bob, there's something funny going on. I said, I guess our negotiations are going to end right now, but I'd like to know what was going on. And Bob said, Tom, he said, it's a beautiful machine. He said, and if we bought it, I'm glad you'd made this decision, because if we bought it, we would have parked it, because we didn't want you as competition. So that was a calibrating moment. And then I had a heck of a time with a lot of people, because they wanted this doggone disclosure agreement or non-disclosure or whatever it was that didn't give me any protection and protected them to the hilt. I contacted IBM, and their legal department came back with an absolutely fantastic agreement. They said, we'd like to look at it. You can tell us all you want. We will not disclose this to anyone unless 3 conditions were met. And they were very reasonable. If we've already invented it, because we're a large corporation and don't know what we've invented all the time, then we want to be safe to use our own. And if you don't, and this will only be good for a year, and then we can use your idea if we want, and so on. I thought, if it doesn't happen in a year, I'm not going to get anywhere. So once I had the IBM prototype of a contractual agreement, then I could show that to other people, And the attitude was, hey, if it's good enough for IBM, it's good enough for me. So that opened a huge door. And I also spent a lot of time in the business library at Berkeley, and I'd haul out the annual reports of the companies that I was going to talk to, and I'd memorize the names of all the officers. And that seemed to work amazingly well, because when you could say, well, you know, your corporate treasurer, Mr. Jones, looks like you have some cash laying around, why, it just worked. So if anybody's trying to sell stuff, why, learn from my mistakes, and I'm sure there are new ones that can be made. But at the end of a year, I was flat out of luck, and I had some fantastic job offers, so that encouraged me on, and we weren't starving. And I had sent the idea down to Hewlett-Packard, got a letter back from Bill Hewlett, and he said he was sending this on to another division, which was frequency and time. And I got a letter back from that person, and he said, well, we're not in this business, but we might be interested in some of the circuits because, you know, no telling where we're going to go. So HP was just didn't pan out at all. And
that's just because the right people were moving along a thought process where we're not in the calculator business.
That's right. They weren't
likely to be in the calculator business, so why should we be interested?
Absolutely.
So it's meeting the wrong guy.
Meeting the wrong guy. So I was in kind of a wit's end, and Carol suggested that we go on a trip and just not worry about it. And so I there weren't answering machines at that time, but I did put an answering machine, hired an answering service, which is a real person that takes calls. And I called her up, and she said, you have a call from Hewlett-Packard. And I thought, whoa. And so I followed up on that, and it was from Paul Stoft, who was at HP Labs. And he said, a fellow here by the name of Tony Lukes that was at SCM, a co-worker of yours, suggested that we call you because we're looking at a calculator made by some people in Southern California, and it looks like it would be great, but it doesn't work all the time. There's about a 5-minute time from when you turn it on till it goes into another mode of failure. But it does some nice stuff. And Tony said, well, you know, Tom, as far as I could tell, his circuits always worked. And it was because I did a worst case design, really. I assumed every component could be at its worst tolerance. I'll tell you more about that later. But so when they turned on, they worked. Either that or they totally blew up, as Ken Peterson, whom I'll talk about later, fully knows. We had some smoke tests from time to time. And anyway, I was called down to look at and discuss what I had. And so I brought the machine down, the green machine, and Paul started playing with it. And he went away and said, I want to talk to somebody. And then I met Barney Oliver, for those of you who don't know, was the infamous, most brilliant person I've ever met and head of HP Laboratories. And so Barney came out and looked at it, and he, like Steve, is left-handed, so he was plunking along and doing, by the way, left-handed people in general, I think, are smarter than right-handed people. Sorry for those of us like me who aren't in that class, but anyway, Barney said, wow, he said, can you do transcendentals on this thing? And because my machine just did solid arithmetic, you know, add, subtract, multiply, divide, and I put a few twists in it that made it much better than what the other people were doing, in my opinion, and I think accepted now that it was an okay decision. But anyway, I said, sure, why not? I mean, it's just more in the algorithmic state machine. And he said, well, we're working on something, and he said, I want to show you something else. And that's where I met Chuck Neary. And HP was working on their first inductively coupled ROM. and it had 64 bits. And that's not a lot.
Yeah, it's not 64K.
No, that's
64
64 bits. And Barney said, we'd like to know if you could put what you have into a ROM. Now, I had just told Barney that I thought I could stick transcendental functions on top of my machine. So I asked him, and I told him why not. And so I asked him if I could possibly get like 32,000 bits, which is a lot bigger than 64. And, you know, I said, that's a lot bigger ROM than this. And I said, do you think you can pull this off? And he answered back with my answer. He said, why not? So with that, he said, can you come back tomorrow? I want you to meet Bill and Dave. And so I said, sure. Bill and Dave who? And he said, Hewlett-Packard. And, you know, it totally blew me away. And so I came back the next day, and both of them plunked around on the machine. And Bill Hewlett asked if he could take it home and play with it. And I said, sure. And so nothing was really done there for about a week until Bill, and by the way, I had the operating part of the green machine, the keyboard and things was in one box, and the guts of it was in another. I never intended it to be a manufactured device. I just wanted to show that what could be done. So there was a power supply that had to be hooked up to the CPU. And Bill Hewlett showed up one day, and he was despondent. And he said, I hooked the power supply leads up backwards. And he said, I am afraid I wiped your machine out. And I said, no. I said, I've got a great big old diode across that thing because I didn't want that to happen. And I said, we probably took a fuse out in the power supply, but I don't think it hurt the machine. And the relief on that man's face was immeasurable. I mean, he said, whoo. Anyway, I think that helped sell the machine because I hadn't thought I'd hit there.
A little bit of a guilt trip.
Yeah. And then I did another thing that seemed to have a large effect. Bill Hewlett asked me if I could do square roots on the machine. And I said, yeah, I can, but you can't. He said, what do you mean? And I said, what do you want to take the square root of? And so he said 3 or something like that. And so I had, luckily, had memorized a series of keystrokes that would just do a Newton approximation, just bang, bang, bang. And so the first approximation, second approximation, there it is. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, I did a Newton's approximation. And I think that helped too, because, you know, I was demonstrating things that I think made a big difference to them.
I think there's something unusual about this calculator at this point, which is the entry order for the operators and the operands. Yeah,
I did it. I had a kind of a bastardized system. The green machine had in-fix multiplication. I do 4 times 3, but post-fix addition. So if I want to take 4 times 3 and add it to 5 times 6, I'd say 4 times 3, and then I'd had a key that said accumulate 0. So it just said, put that, it's very much like an old computer instructions said, stick it in the accumulator. So I put it there, and then I'd put another one in that said 5 times 6, and then I could do an accumulate plus, and it would add, multiply the 5 times 6 and add it to the whatever I said before. And it got rid of a lot of parentheses. It wasn't totally Polish at that time.
Mm-hmm. But it's the beginning of a register-based arithmetic where you're operating on registers as opposed to operands along the string of an equation.
Right. And what I was trying to do is, the Frieden had a calculator, and they were pretty much doing full-blown Polish. They had a couple of weird things in there, but I didn't want to get in their bag because the mechanical calculator people were heavy on patents. So this was a workaround on that. And it's also reflected in the 9100. So anyway, we started out on, then I went in to talk to Bill Hewlett, and Dave Packard in their office, and we had about a 5-minute discussions and shook hands. And they wanted to evaluate the machine over 6 weeks. It was interesting because Dave Packard, he said, he said, we won't take the machine without you. And I said, it's a deal, because you can't have it without me. Because, it took both of us. I mean, it just took that. Because there was a lot of instruction that was to be done.
But not as an employee.
No, not as an
I should
employee.
point out that you ended up never being an employee of HP.
Yeah, and I did that on purpose. I didn't want to join the structure because I didn't want to displace anybody. I was there totally project-oriented. And it turned out that was an interesting thing. It bothered a lot of people, but it allowed me awesome freedom, and I didn't misuse it, I don't think. So I spent many hours jumping levels of only on a couple of occasions did I have to put pressure on. And this is a good time to tell one of them in retrospect, because I had, I'll tell you about how the HP 35, in my opinion, got its numbers. But I had to go down and see a man in the computer room and get a HP 35 assigned. And I can't remember, he had red hair, it's important in this story. And I said, I want to reserve a number. He said, what is it? I said, it's 35, HP 35. And he said, it's got to have a 4-digit division number followed by a 4-digit product number. I knew that wasn't going to work. I didn't know that was the rule, but I knew that it's got to be 35. So now I've got this problem. And so I said, I'm going to pretend like his name was John. And I said, John, I got to find out some way to make it 35. And he said, well, you can't do it. The computer program just takes that number. Now, HP had an IBM 704 at that time, and I spent a year on a 704, more than that. So I said, I can reprogram it for you. That's no problem. I mean, there's no problem at all. And that red hair started to show. And, he was just about to kick me out right straight through the ceiling. And I said, John, I said, here's my problem. If you won't let me do it, I have to go tell somebody that it can't be done. And he's not going to be happy. And he said, who's he? And I said, his name's Hewlett. And he said, oh, shit. So that's how we violated the rules and it became the HP 35. But I don't think I could have done that as an employee. Just don't think so.
And that's because Hewlett had picked the number, right?
Yeah, he picked the number. As far as I know, I went into his office and said, these guys we're into marketing. This is a little bit out of chronological order, but we're doing marketing stuff, and they got to write ads, and we've got to have a number and all these kinds of things. And the crew that was working on it, Tom Whitney, Chung Tung, Dave Cochran, and all these people. A lot of people came up with nice names, like Superstar, and they're far out, kind of wild. And Hewlett summarily rejected them, and he kept looking at the machine. And he said, "Let's call it the HP 35." It's his company. I said, "Why?" And that's when he said, "Because it has 35 keys." And I said, "That's good enough for me."
So let's now jump back to the 9100 development, because you've just agreed to work on this for 6 weeks.
Yeah. So at the end of 6 weeks, I had the hardest part was coming up with a new packaging scheme, because I had wire wrap, and I won't say it was the hardest part, but there was a lot to go on. And
so at this point, you're deciding on the size of the box, right?
Well, not quite yet.
Oh, okay.
But we're getting close. and they decided that the 6 weeks was over and we could really do it. And so we were chugging along, and now comes a significant phase, because I decided that the architecture that I had of this mixed infix, postfix was really hard to program. I never intended it to be a programmable language. And as everybody knows now, the postfix notation is a piece of cake. I mean, that's what you want. So we had gone along and had a prototype chugging along, and had diode read-only memories in which every bit in the evolving HP 9100, when you made a change to the code, you had to go and unsolder the bit from one place and move a diode to another place, and it's terrible. I decided that if we're going to make this thing programmable, I've got to go full Polish, which, if I could do it again, I would have called it, instead of reverse Polish notation, I would call it parenthesis-free notation. It's not my invention, it was Bob Frankenberg's idea.
That's a marketing thing, just to get it more acceptable.
Yeah, more acceptable, because who can spell Lukashevitz? You know? And by the way, Lukashevitz only put his notation in a footnote of a book. It's hard to find. I can't read Polish, so it's not well transcribed, but I did find it down there, and he said it worked well. Even Google, I spent a couple days trying to find out more about it. Lukashevitz was, I have his whole bio over there, but he died in 1958, I think, or 58, I think. And marvelous man. Well, we won't get into that. Anyway, so I had decided that, and Barney, I explained the stuff to him. And so while Bill Hewlett was off touring Japan, we had changed the architecture on his machine. And he was hot on this project. He came in red-eyed from a flight, sat down, and there was only one time in my life that I could have killed Dave Cochran. Dave said, "Bill, you'll never guess what Tom did." I looked at him, and Bill said, "What did Tom do?" And he said, "He changed the architecture on the machine." And Bill said, "The what?" And this was about to spiral out of control. Fortunately, Barney was there. And I said, "Well, to full Polish so I could program it." And Bill said, "Look at it." He said, "I bought a machine because I liked the way that thing worked, and that's the way it's going to work." First time and only time I ever saw him really ripped. And Barney, in his awesome way, said, "Bill, you're tired. Go home, come back tomorrow, and look at it again." And that was probably the touchiest single moment in the whole development of the 9100. But anyway, we got it all changed.
So he came back. And
he came back and listened and understood it. That's one of the nice things about having a principal who understands what's going on. And he actually liked it. And I still was working around the Frieden patent, and so I stuck a register. It's fine details. I made a minor change that I knew would work around the Frieden patent. But, and I want to say, there was one employee at HP for whom I have great respect, and it was a young technician, well, not maybe so young, but a technician named Earl Freeman, who was in charge of changing all those diodes. I mean, that's all he did was unsolder our bugs and patch them back up. And one time he said, "Tom, this is driving me nuts." He said, "I can't stand this anymore." He said, "I got to get out of here." He said, "I don't believe this project's ever going to work anyway, and why should I be working so hard on all this stuff?" And I could sympathize with him. He said, "I'll tell you what," he said, "I'll stay with you for sure until you find another person, but then I'd like to leave." And he could have cut right then. But I really respected him. So, anyway, we got the thing in a package, and it's time to make it pretty, because this thing was anything but pretty. I mean, it was to all of us because it was working and chunking along. Tony Lukes was doing the display circuitry. Ken Peterson was helping immensely on the ASM stuff and working endless hours. We spent, I don't know if we had weekends. I think they called them off for a year or two.
And at this point, there are no integrated circuits in the
There are no integrated circuits. Yes.
Why is that?
Well, Falstaff was really on my case because I'm going discrete components the full way. And at that time, I had a pretty good idea of the volume of this thing, and I'd been working on some packaging. And I finally said, Paul, I would be glad to use integrated circuits.
Now, why did Paul want to use integrated circuits?
I think it was vogue, you know. I mean, heck, they're coming
cool.
down the pike. Yeah, they're really cool, except that they sucked up power like you couldn't believe. So I told Paul, I said, Paul, I think that if we're going to use integrated circuits, it's going to take this much power. And I knew what it was going to take, about 50 watts or something like that for the discrete components. And I had power switching into things. Most of the circuitry was off in that thing. And we got a patent on that. So that all of the ROM chips that were used in calculating devices, that all the computer chips that went to standby power, HP had a patent on it. They made more money on the royalties that they collected from other people on that than they ever paid me by orders of magnitude. I mean, it was super patent.
Good deal for them.
Yeah, it was a super deal. And fortunately, Ron Griffin, a patent attorney that I dearly loved, said, let's not say we turn the power off to certain parts of the circuit. Let's say we substantially turn it off. And that word substantial was the get-go. I mean, we turned it all off, but substantial includes everything. And a little bit extra that made HP a huge slug of money. Anyway, Paul wanted to know, how about this power supply? I mean, how about ICs? And I finally said, Paul, if you can fit the power supply to drive the power that's required for the integrated circuits in the case that I think will be the size of the whole machine, I'll put your integrated circuits in. And that ended that conversation.
So he couldn't even get the power supply for the integrated circuits over that volume?
No, and so it just wasn't the time. It wasn't a bad idea, it just wasn't the time. And so then Steve had asked, how did we get the case decided?
The form factor.
The form factor and everything. I went to Al Inhelder and Ed Lilienwall and the crew that did industrial design. And I said, I thought it was a great solution. I knew pretty well what the volume of everything was going to be. And as I recall, I said, this is what we're building. And why don't you guys do what you're good at? I need so many cubic inches. And if you can make a case that looks good, I think I can get this stuff in to fit. And so they took off with, instead of me saying wrap all this nice box around this circuitry, I wanted a nice looking box and we put the circuitry in it. And anybody that's ever opened up a 9100 knows that it's weird, because there are boards that are mounted up that like an alligator's teeth mesh in and don't touch each other. But it worked. You know, it's a great idea, I think.
Now, Bill Hewlett had some input onto the form factor as well, I believe.
Yeah, he wanted it to fit on his desk.
Actually, in his desk.
In his desk, yeah. And I think Dave Cochran was the one that decided that they were either going to enlarge his desk or saw part of it off or do something, but Bill never did pick up on that. I wasn't in on that at all, but it was a clever solution. And, you know, there are people like, indispensable people like Matty Schneider, Bill Hewlett's secretary, that would try to... Bill Hewlett was an interesting fellow, had broad interests, and sometimes, because I was not an employee, he'd see me walking by and say, come on in. We'd talk about things that had nothing to do with HP, but, you know, I guess I could listen to him, and it was just an outlet for him. I had one person when Bill came over and we were BSing and over in the corner one time, and he said, this was an HP Labs, and this guy came over, he said, why did you talk to him? He said, do you know how much money we wasted while you were talking to him? He said, it's $15,000 corporate time. That's what that hour cost, or something like that. And I thought, hey, you know, I mean, the guy wanted to talk. He may have saved $100,000 because he got some bug off of his mind. But, you know, there are strange people in the world, and I'm one of them, so I can't make too many criticisms. But anyway, I suppose this is an interesting, the right time to say what everybody asked me what my title was. And I never knew. I mean, I didn't have one until about 10 years ago. My wife, Paula, was friends of Peter Drucker. And for those of you who don't know Peter Drucker, he was the one who got Japan started up he was a consultant to managers. And he got big corporate managers, and he got Japan cranked up on the just-in-time system. So, I mean, he's a powerful guy. And he and Paula were buddies because Paula, as a little girl, went to a YMCA camp of the Rockies and with her father, who was a minister. And Peter Drucker fell in love with Paula, which is easy to do. And so Peter was up here one time, and he was Austrian, sitting not far from where I am now. And he said, so Tom, what did you do? And I said, well, Peter, and I told a lot of the story that I have now, and the fact that I wasn't an employee. And he said, Tom, I know what you were. And I said, what's that, Peter? And he said, you were the corporate lunatic. And he said, every corporation needs one, just one. So now my job, you know, many years hence is, I was HP's corporate lunatic for a while. And I hope I didn't misuse it.
All right, so now we're at the point where the 9100 is built.
Yep, it's built.
And it's, I guess, on the market at this point.
Well, it was on the market. And I'll give you another insight into Hewlett-Packard. We had 5 HP 9100s, and we introduced it at the IEEE show in, I think, 1968. I'm not positive, but I think that was it. Bill Hewlett said to Barney and me, he said, I would like to talk to Ann Wang, because Wang was for sure the premier person with desktop calculators. They had something called the Loci 1 or something. It doesn't make any difference. And Bill said, this is going to influence them dramatically. And so we had a meeting with about Bill and Barney and Ann Wang and me, and I think that was it. And we gave a demo to Ann Wang, and he looked at it, and he said, this is a beautiful machine. He said, thank you. He said, I have to leave because we have to get busy in our company. And
That's a straight up way to treat a competitor.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and so that was just HP. In that same meeting, not very long afterwards, let's say, Barney was showing off the inside of a machine, and now these were going out to the first 5 marketing people for the 9100, and he leaned over and he had a tie clasp, and it drug across one of the PC boards, and I could just see this trail of sparks, and that was this guy's machine. He said, that's my machine. And, you know, I thought, what do you do? Didn't faze Barney, you know, that's just life. So anyway, we got it back.
It killed the machine, but you resuscitated it?
No, I didn't. We had to. Ken Peterson probably resuscitated it.
Okay.
And absolutely fantastic story in this same thing. One of the guys didn't know Bill Hewlett. You know, he's standing around there, and Bill Hewlett's in the room. And Bill Hewlett, no, he came in and needed a calculator. He wanted to run some computation. And he went to pick up this calculator, just one of the 5 that was sitting there, and walk out of the room with it. Nobody said anything except this one guy who he didn't have any idea who this stranger was. And he said, wait! He said, that's my machine. And Carol was in the room, and she said, it's okay. It's Bill Hewlett. You know? But those are fun times.
All right, so the 9100 is now on the market.
Yeah.
And it's a big success.
Yeah, it's going great guns. And I've talked to Steve a lot. He spent the night up here at Sea Ranch. So my voice is not usually this way because I don't usually talk to people, so it's a little basso profundo. But one of the most interesting marketing things, I spent a lot of time out in marketing. And one time I got a call from a fellow by the name of Steve Medvedovsky, who is a thin shell structural engineer working out of Berkeley. And he had an Olivetti programmable machine. And for some reason, I ended up in his office demoing the machine. Maybe because he's just such a fascinating guy to talk to. First time I met him, but you just knew. And so he said, so, tell me about this machine. I want to know what it will do. So I told him. And he said, can it solve this program? And I thought, oh man, this is not a simple set of equations. And he wants me to program it. You know, I mean, first of all, I did learn that never take on anybody's program. Yeah, I mean, it's filled with disaster because a lot of times they haven't solved it themselves. And there is no solution. And they want you to do it, and then you come up and embarrass them because you say, you got to tell me this variable. And they don't know it, you know, so what do? I mean, it's a disaster. But here Steve had his program already running on the Olivetti. So I knew that that part of the problem went away. I thought, I'll try it. So, I programmed this thing, and it had a transcendental equation in it that I had to do some fancy stuff. And he put the variables in, and we did it, and it goes shook, and got the answer, you know, less than a minute. And it was heavy-duty computation. And I was greatly relieved. And he said, not too bad, not too bad. And I said, how long does it take the Olivetti? He said, it took about an hour. And I said, so, you know, like, I got a sale there, boy. For the, you know, and he'll say good words about it to that whole profession. And he came back and he said, well, Tom, he said, you know, when I bought the Olivetti, this was a 4-day hand computation. And he said, they saved me 4 days. And he said, you're just saving me an hour. He said, let's get this thing in perspective. So, you know, that was a pivotal point in my education. I respected what he said, but he ended up buying it, and we were friends for a long time.
Well, that's a good lead into why the 9100 was so much faster than the other machines of the era.
Yeah, well, it was because it had a random access memory. I mean, just flat out, that was it. And
I think there was more than that. There's also the multi-operation processor.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
That's kind of important.
I forgot about our 16-layer integrated PC board that had I never worked so hard in my life in anything as getting that PC-ROM, 16-layer PC board. I mean, 16 sandwiched layers together that had to be accurate to about just a few thousandths of an inch. I admire the Clyde Coombs, Bob Paracombe. They pushed it. And when I first talked to them, by the way, the state-of-the-art was 50 mil wire. That's 50 thousandths of an inch wire spacing. And that would never go. I needed 15 thousandths of an inch. You know, it's almost 4 times better than they'd ever done. And so, and it was crucial. And by this time, everybody was pretty well tuned into the fact that Hewlett-Packard liked what was going on, and the corporate lunatic had access that other channels didn't have. So anyway, I was talking to him, and I said, gosh, you know, can you do this? And he said, no way, you know, we just can't push it that way. So I thought, well, there goes the project. And the next morning, Bob Paracombe called up, and he said, Tom, he said, oddly enough, I can't push 15 down to, I mean, 50 mil process down below 30. He said, that's the best. But he said, I think I have a way to leapfrog it and jump to 15. And it did.
So the ROM, that was a critical aspect. But in addition to that, there's a 64-bit processor in here that is doing many operations in parallel.
Yeah.
That's an unusual aspect.
It was. I marked, see, with the ASM, I could do parallel operations. And I marched that over in. And now, mind you, that There wasn't I don't even think 4004 existed.
No, it didn't.
So there were no microprocessors, and when it did come out, it was 4 bits wide. And I had a 64-bit one. And I could do parallel operations. I mean, I could do, instead of stacking them up in series, I could do 20, 30 at a crack if at the maximum, and always probably 6 instructions at a time, average. I don't know. Anyway, lots of them, and it had a lot of power. Also, it turned the power off to almost all of the circuits that weren't active, so that the latency, the standby power was zip. So we weren't reheating the room with the machine, and all that really worked well. And so we had people doing standard ASM designs, and we were marching them over into the PC-ROM, and while I was burning brain cells designing a sense amplifier that would take, this is engineering, but an itty-bitty signal that was about 3 millivolts, something like that, and 20 nanoseconds wide. That's 20 billionths of a second wide. And in 3 transistors, I had to get that to 100 milliamperes and a microsecond or so wide, and be able to do the next one lickety-cut after it. I really worked on that. And not only on top of that, but the signals had so much common mode noise, which is something that is, you can have it's kind of like trying to look through a telescope that you know works, but somebody's on the other side jumping it up and down on you, you know, and I have to stabilize that image. I had to pull all that out. That about did me in. But anyway, it worked, and the thing that made it work was that bit in the green machine that seemed to be inverted, ones and zeros. You know, the same. I pulled off that same trick on the other one. So if I hadn't been lucky enough to be dumb enough to find that technique, we wouldn't have been having this interview today.
So the 9100 hits the market. It's a big success. How long does it take Bill Hewlett to start bothering you that he wants one in his shirt pocket?
Yeah, well, we left when we were doing the Ann Wang thing. Bill came up and he says, "Tom, I've got an idea for the next machine." And it was a broad spec. He said, "I want it to cost 1/10 as much." So now we're looking at a $500 machine. "I want it to be 10 times as fast," which I didn't beat. And I want it to be 1/10 of the volume, which we beat many times over. So with those as specs,
there was no technology of the day to do this. That was
absolutely not.
In 1968, there's no technology available. Not even lunar lander technology can do this.
No, it just wasn't there. So for the next 4 years, I was doing strange stuff like marketing and going on over to Europe, helping with marketing, writing publications that promoted what we were doing in the digital world, and doing some strange trips. I went to Novosibirsk, which is in Siberia, to give a speech at the request of Tom Perkins, who called me up. "Hey, Tom," he said, "Bill wants to give a speech in Novosibirsk to a bunch of digital guys." And he said, "Can you do it?" And I said, "Yeah, where's Novosibirsk?" And he said, "Siberia." And I said, "What's the subject?" He said, "Oh, you can choose it." He said, "Don't make any difference." And I said, he said, "It has to have a paper. They have to pre-publish." And I said, "When's the paper due?" He said, "Last week." So anyway, I went over there, and my speech was, now bear in mind, this was when timeshare computers were going big time. So I gave a speech in the Soviet Union, and the title was "The Trend Toward Decentralized Computing," because I knew that the 9100 was going to lead into the death of timeshare. And I thought, who is centralized more than Russia at that time? And I thought, well, I'd get a dig in on that. But they let me out. So, there was a lot of times when Bill Hewlett at one time went skiing, broke his Achilles tendon, and was in a wheelchair. And I didn't even want to see him when he was in his wheelchair, because he'd say, "How are we coming?" You know, and I just
meaning on the small
yeah,
machine.
on the small machine, and I thought a lot about what it would be, but my God, you know, I had to have a 1,000-fold improve in the technology of integrated circuits. One time, the only thing I could tell him was, he said, "Why can't we do it with the existing stuff?" And I said, "Because it'd suck the batteries right up the leads. You know, we just can't do it." So one day I read a trade publication, and I found this article from, forget the company, but CMOS was announced. And so I went to Bill Hewlett, and I said, "You know, this paper says that we may be able to do it. I don't know if it's real, but we can start." And I said, "But we have a second problem to meet $500. I think the price of the CMOS, if it is what they say it can be, would be great. But for a display, the only going thing was light-emitting diodes, and Hewlett-Packard made them, and they were, I think, $8 a pop.
For a digit.
A digit. And we had 13 of them. I mean, I knew that. And so he said, "What do we need?" And I said, "I don't know, $3.5. And he, right then, picks up the phone. And he dials, and he said, "Dave?" And I thought he was talking to Dave Packard, but it's Dave Weindorf, who runs the optical section of HP. And he said, "Dave," he said, "we need some information on your LEDs. What do you want?" And he says, "Yeah," he said, "how much time and how many dollars would it take to get them down to $3, $3.50 a piece?"
For a digit.
For a digit. And there was this silence. And Bill, I don't think Dave Weindorf had said anything. And Bill said, "Well, you can think about it." He said, "Anytime tomorrow will be fine." So that was, there was a typical HP trait that I found. There was humor, at the same time seriousness, and they got the answer. And with that, I felt comfortable in going back to the crew of Tom Whitney, Dave Cochran, Chung Tung, a bunch of other people, who had already spent a couple of years working on what would have been a laptop-sized, something you could carry in a valise. What do you call those things for the office?
Briefcase.
Briefcase, yeah, and a briefcase. Little small, it fit inside a briefcase. And so now, as I recall, I was trying to talk these guys out of what they were doing. I mean, shoot, there are a couple of years of their lives involved in this. And I'm going to try to talk them into something that fits in their shirt pocket, because that was what we decided that it might be able to. Bill Hewlett, and I, not knowing any better, decided that would be a good target. So it took a while. I mean, these guys were not eager to abandon what they did. And I think Tom Whitney was the one, and Dick Monnier perhaps. Dick Monnier was a super guy to work with, as was Tom Whitney. And Francais Rodet, who was always a blast to work with. I never saw anybody in my life that could be more excited than Francais. I mean, he was, if you were ever low, just talk to him for 5 minutes. I mean, enthusiasm is contagious. Anyway, they talked it over, and I think that they saw this incredible opportunity. And as we were going along, Bill Hewlett came up and he said, "Tom, I want to not go too far in this." He said, "I'd like to start out with the Mannheim version," or something like that. I didn't know what he was talking about. It was just a 4-banger, add, subtract, multiply, divide. And I was talking a lot with Barney on this thing, and Dave and Tom and the guys. And I think we decided that we could get what was the HP35 in the HP35, because, ROM's ROM, and it's getting smaller. And so then the argument...
And basically, the difference between a 4-banger and a machine that can do transcendentals is just the amount of ROM code.
Yeah, and the market is awesome. And so, but man, there were a lot of people working on 4-bangers now.
Yes.
And so I went to Bill Hewlett and put forth this argument. I said, Bill, nobody's working on what the HP35 turned out to be. And I said, I know that if we come in there, you've got the market from there up sewn up. But if we go down, it's going to be competitive, 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 all the way up. And so he said, okay. And I said, you can always go down and make a four-banger, you know. I mean, that's okay. But he bought it. And then that was the time. One time I watched a professional billiards game, and that had a great influence on me. I learned something very important that I'd like to pass along. And this is 3-cushion billiards. And I had a father-in-law that played that, and it's an awesome game. I mean, the first part of a pool game is okay. The ball does what it wants, but it picks up spin on the second one that you can't believe, and it doesn't. Snell's law of the angle of incidence and the angle of reflection no longer hold. It becomes absolute skill of knowing what this is going to do. And I soon found out that the name of that game is to leave yourself set up for the next shot. And if you can't do that, make sure that the next guy is going to leave himself stitched and the control goes back to you. So the HP35 had a lot of hooks in it that led to the HP65, which was my favorite
For
machine. Example? It was made so that it could be programmable. It went full Polish. It was totally any compromise that could be made that led to the HP65 was in the HP35. Now, I really didn't tell everybody that, but I knew that we were going to have a programmable machine the next time, and this was, you know, quite a ways down the pipe. But that I just knew that was HP65 was far and away my favorite project. I loved it, and at one time I gave a speech, and I knew that people were contemplating programmable devices, and I purposely misled a bunch of people, and because they knew what we were probably working on too. And I said, you know, in the speech, I said, you know, it's when we do programmable devices, it's imperative that you have some kind of media to reload the program. You can't type in a 30, 40-step program every time. And a lot of people I knew were just going to count on that. And I said, you've got to have something, because if you type in a 30 or 40-step program, you've got to run a sample program to make sure that you hit all the steps correctly. It's got to be editable. It's a pain in the butt. So, got to have this magnetic media. They had no idea that we were going to put it on that one little teeny card reader. And a lot of the people were going out and making, and I did say, like cassette storage, and they were hooking cassette programs up. And when we introduced the HP35, I got telephone calls, and I could hear projects falling in Silicon Valley because these guys were totally scooped. They couldn't believe that we got that little teeny card reader.
Well, that's on the 65.
On the 65.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, there is this, if you're designing projects, all I can say is think of don't stitch yourself. You know, make compromises in what you're doing to make the next one a natural follow-on. You don't want to get your customers mad at you. And it was a lot of fun to give that speech. And I didn't lie. I mean, I didn't mislead anybody. I told them what they did. I just didn't tell them how to do it.
Right.
Okay.
So the 65 is out, and so you continue on your association with HP?
Well, I started just. I did some stuff, yeah, but I didn't. I got very interested in the what turned out to be the HP Basic stuff. But, you know, at that time I decided they were much better than I at that time. There was a good, heavy-duty, qualified, well-experienced Hewlett-Packard crew. And I didn't have that much to offer. And so, like Douglas MacArthur, I just kind of, old soldiers never die, they just fade away, till today.
Well, that's true. You really haven't talked very much about this in the past.
No,
and I appreciate you talking now.
Well,
but
a lot of people ask me about that, and I can say that the rewards for me, outside of the fact that I met marvelous people, Jonah Humphreys, Eileen Dugan, secretaries for Paul Stoft and Barney Oliver, great cheerleaders, and to have had a relationship with Barney Oliver that was extended far beyond Hewlett-Packard was an awesome experience. So, I mean, my time at HP was unbelievable. But I forgot where I was going. I got all excited about the people that I met.
But now we're parting company here because they're fully qualified to carry you along.
Right. So then we decided, well, what's old Tom going to do? And I did a couple projects. I did one that I spent probably 10 or more years on, and it was one of my favorite things, and I abandoned it for two reasons. By the way, if anybody wants to know what I still think will be the biggest scoop in the world, it was a grammar-based computer system. By grammar, I mean all the computers today run on something that is essentially called a finite state machine. It was invented by von Neumann. It sure has a lot more polish on it than he had, but it still runs in the class of finite state machines. Compilers, on the other hand, take a very specific language and convert applications from one type of language into the assembly language that runs computers. And I thought, well, why can't I take the next level up in the hierarchy of computer science, which is context-free grammar, and try to run machines directly on that. It has no operating system. It has characteristics that are awesome. You don't have bugs. I mean, it's not that you can't do the wrong thing, but you can't write code. There are testers that test to see if a context-free grammar is indeed context-free. And if it is, it'll never do strange things. You can't come in from the side and stumble over your own code. It won't let you. And so back in the corner, I have 10 years of work that I showed to Steve. And I got far enough to have the semantics, got a great way to convert stuff directly. There's no assembly. I mean, it executes the higher level code, and it does a super job at it. And I had that bagged, but as I'm doing this, I'm getting older, And fortunately, I'm not cash strapped right now, and so I don't have this added enthusiasm. But I could not solve the fast parsing thing. I had to be able to read the grammar and make it work fast. And so in the 10 years or so that after I parked that project and decided I wanted to have another life of some kind, and instead of having eaten tortillas slipped under doors and not even knowing that the word weekend existed, I kind of backed off, and now I can see an entirely different. I know how to do the parser. It's not a parser; it's a lot of simultaneous parsers, and it has some attributes that I was telling Steve of what I see when I read Science Magazine about neurons. It's kind of wild, but I'm not going to do it because I'm 72 years old, and I don't want to go through the marketing and the long hours that I know it takes. So I've got a lot of drawings and some hardware done, But so I look at it every now and then and smile, and you know, I got my kicks out of doing things like that. Or
so before we wrap this up, you know, is there anything else that you want to talk about?
yeah, I want to say one thing about what really was a momentous instant in my life. I didn't know it was going to happen, but it did. And when I finally decided that E times pi was the wrong thing, besides the machine hung up and didn't do it, and I fixed that, and I thought it was going to take off, and I thought, well, maybe two times 2, but I wouldn't know if it was multiplying or adding.
Right.
So I did something that was within reason, and it came up with the right answer. And it seemed to me like a full year's work focused into just one tiny instant. And it was sitting right in front of me was more computing power per unit volume than ever existed on Earth. And
there's a deep satisfaction.
yeah.
That's really the reward in engineering, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
The payoff.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I had not thought that emotion was even there. And
so that's the first time you experienced that.
yeah, it was. It certainly was. And I had other ones. When HP65 first turned on, I didn't do any of the stuff except put the functional character. I said what it was to be, and other people did it, and that brought me a lot of great satisfaction, because I thought that freed a lot of people who understood problems but were not experts, but they could hack their way through and get their solutions much better than somebody who was an expert programmer and tried to interview out of that same person the problem. That doesn't work nearly as well as the person that understands the problem doing a sloppy job of programming. The person that understands the problem is the person that you want to talk to. So anyway, it's been fun talking to you. I'm sorry I didn't mention all the people. Chung Tung, if I didn't mention you.
I think you did mention him. You
Yeah,
mentioned a lot of people on that on the 35 project. So I want to thank you very much for taking the time to talk, and I had a wonderful couple of days with you, and look forward to talking with you again.
Yeah, well, it was fun, and the mere fact that Steve is still standing is amazing, because I cooked him a big dinner last night, and I must have done something right.
Yes, I'm still here.
I'm not a world-renowned cook, but we had a good time.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.